It's funny you brought up abortion there as well. Not to go all over the map, but one of the really interesting points I found, I think it was chapter 8. We discussed Dave Chappelle's Sticks and Stones as a sort of test case for how the moral permissibility of abandoning a baby has come down to consent-based morality because of the sexual revolution. So it's not even now that men are trying to say, no, this is my child, like, you shouldn't kill it. It's now saying that, well, if you can kill it, I can walk away from it, and we can both renounce our obligations and both be atomized individuals, as some of the feminists like Firestone would have wanted, a complete disconnection of the sexes. So I didn't notice in the book where you personally lined up on the issue. If you're not comfortable talking about it, that's fine. But do you think we need to, especially in the UK, because we don't have that conversation at all, in the US they are, have the conversation about abortion access and the morality of it in order to curb the worst excesses of the sexual revolution when it's sometimes used as a contraception?
Yeah, well spotted. I mean, I kind of deliberately didn't write about abortion. It's such a painful topic, except to point out that clearly it's incredibly important in the history of sexual revolution. I mean, I think the reason that the timeline is as it is in this country and also elsewhere, where you have the pill made available first to married women and then to unmarried women, and then you have abortion decriminalization and legalization coming in afterwards, is I think because the pill wasn't actually an especially effective contraception in its early incarnation. It's still like the oral pill still has quite a high failure rate and therefore results in unwanted pregnancies quite often. But because you had the introduction of it leading to the collapse of social norms around heterosexual relationships, you had an absolute rise in the amount of premarital sex that was happening, and that was resulting in an increase in the number of unwanted pregnancies, and therefore you had abortion brought in basically as a kind of backup option, particularly I think because you had, the daughters of politicians and other, you had middle class women changing their sexual behavior in a way that they was really radically different from the past, and therefore it seemed more in the interests of decision makers to permit abortion. Yeah, and it is clearly the case that the existence of legalized abortion does radically change how much both men and women feel they need to invest in sexual relationships and how careful they need to be. You've probably seen various articles after the Dobbs decision about, I've stopped having casual sex because of Dobbs, this sort of thing. Which they are sort of funny because they're like, yes, that's exactly what conservatives wanted to do.
I covered that with some glee, thank you for recreating the Lysistrata, but I wasn't going to go there anyway.
Yeah. I think it's because many liberals don't really understand the conservative objection to abortion. I think the assumption is that it's just rooted in misogyny. I mean, maybe in a handful of cases it is. I do try to explain this sometimes to liberal friends, like conservatives who oppose abortion. They really do believe that this is comparable as an ethical catastrophe to, say, the transatlantic slave trade. They really do believe that. I am on the fence on the morality of abortion, basically. I mean, I probably actually am roughly in the position that the modal voter is, including the modal female voter. Women are more anti-abortion than men are. Mothers are the most anti-abortion group that there is. And the modal view is basically that abortion is a bad, sad thing that sometimes needs to happen, and that it's the earlier the better, and that there is such a thing as a good and a bad abortion. There are bad reasons to have one, and there are better reasons to have one. That's basically where I lie. I also do recognise, though, and this is something that I wrestle with, and I've actually just written a really long essay on this for First Things, which will hopefully be out in a month or two, that the reason that abortion is as big a deal as it is as a political issue, particularly in America, and less so here, but of course it was a bigger issue here. It's just that we have the pro-choice argument has won here more than it has done so yet in America. We don't know what direction they're heading in, but is because abortion represents the bleeding edge of de-Christianization. And really, the late 60s and early 70s is a very important dividing line in terms of the end of institutionalized Christianity at the state level, because Christians have a very unusually vehement opposition to abortion among faith traditions, both pre and after Christ. And Christians also have a very vehement opposition to infanticide, which of course in the Roman world was completely normal and actually has been normal in most societies. This isn't nice to talk about, but my first degree was in anthropology. Infanticide is extremely common and abortion is extremely common. And most societies view them pretty much on a continuum and see them as morally permissible in certain circumstances, normally for roughly the same reasons as we now see abortion as permissible. The difference is that we have the technology that enables us to basically kill the unborn baby earlier than, say, ancient Romans who don't have ultrasound. Christianity stands out among all of these societies as having a very unique attitude towards abortion and infanticide. And that's an attitude that obviously by many pro-choice secularists is going to be dismissed as archaic, illogical. It seems sort of almost arbitrary that Christians would have this strange view of the fetus. I don't think that it is arbitrary. I think that it is a logical extension of a very central Christian idea, which is that might is not right, that Christians are, very strange in the first century for thinking that weak people are not deserving of our contempt. They are deserving of our love and protection. That's a very radical Christian idea. It completely upends sort of pre-existing ethical ideas in which obviously the strong are deserving of veneration, and if they're strong, it must be because they're doing something right. And if someone is weak or poor or disabled, or it must be that there is some flaw within them, or that they've committed some sin in a past life. That is generally the assumption in most societies. Christian societies say the opposite. They have this kind of topsy-turvy view of morality, which is very, very radical. And I don't think that you can hold that view that there is something very valuable about weakness that deserves protection without extending that idea to the unborn child. I think that the Christian aversion to abortion is a completely logical extension of that idea. And the problem, therefore, I think for feminism is that feminism also relies on that idea. I think that feminism is an outgrowth from Christianity. The idea that even though, of course, now, many contemporary feminists, most contemporary feminists reject Christianity and regard their project as one of like tearing down the old patriarchal religious systems and so on. I think, following sort of Tom Holland's argument in Dominion and other people as well, I think that actually Christian values are still completely suffuse our society. So much of what we think about morality is derived from Christianity, even if we don't realize it, and even if we've never stepped foot inside a church. And I think feminism, so much secular feminist argument rests on this idea that women are specially deserving of protection. To which, regardless of their birth, regardless of which men they're related to, that there is something essential about women. Actually, the more vulnerable, the better. The more kind of intersecting oppressions you have, the better. There's some like special value which is deserving of political representation and protection from men. That isn't a view shared by all societies by any means, And I think that the process of dechristianization begun really in the 19th century, and then you see the acceleration in the 1960s to now. The next frontier, I think, and this is what I wrote my essay about first things, is infanticide, because that was one of the first Christian impositions on the Roman law to ban infanticide. That was what the first Christian emperors imposed on pagans. And I think that if we were to reverse that, which I think we are set to do with, say, Canadian euthanasia, then that will be a real line in the sand. That will be a point at which we've really undone the Christian Revolution, or it's a sharp line. I think the terrible risk in doing that is, even to people who aren't persuaded that there's any kind of moral problem with abortion, is that you risk completely doing away with this whole moral principle of protecting the weak. And so I really think that feminists I think that there are ways of making arguments in favor of some kinds of abortion which don't do away with that idea. But I think that the really radical pro-abortion position, the idea that, they're just parasites, abortion is meaningless, it's like getting a tooth removed, all this kind of stuff. We have no obligation to our children, that kind of view. I mean, it does extend into, attitude that some mothers take towards their living children as well. You read in the New York Times, I swear, every other week, there's something about a woman abandoning her family for girl boss reasons, right? Like that way of thinking, I think the women making those arguments don't appreciate the extent to which they're soaring at the branch on which they sit. Which is a very long-winded way of saying that I don't have a sort of, I don't campaign on abortion issues. I would not describe myself as pro-life, but I do have a very queasy attitude towards this. And I think the reason that it is such a fundamental source of political conflict is because it is a really, really fundamental source of moral conflict, which feeds into so much else.
Well, thanks very much for how comprehensive that was. Seriously, I think that historical fault line and how it comes into conflict with the progress that you questioned very early on in the book is very well exemplified by Stella Creasy and Jacob Rees-Mogg's battle in the recent hearing on making abortion a right in the UK. And even though my eyebrow raised somewhat at the foundations of feminism in Christianity, given how many contemporary Marxists who are diametrically and intentionally opposed to Christianity have infiltrated the movement, and at least
Marxist and literally Christian as well. Sorry, just
definitely not. We're doing
fundamental ideas.
No, well, yeah, but
it's like a terrible heretical outgrowth.
Yeah, it's the literal inversion from Marx's the main axiom of, from each according to ability to each according to his need is an inversion of the Gospel of Matthew, and there's so many of those subversive things. But we're going to do that on the website at some point, I promise everyone. But the outgrowth of that made me raise an eyebrow, but it did remind me of when you said in your chapter about the abolitionist movement, where many women were going on Christian precepts and weaving that tapestry to tell Parliament this is a moral wrong and we should undo it. That was a similar perspective, and this is where, even as someone who came back around to Catholicism, 2 so years ago, that I found myself juxtaposed against abortion on the grounds of humility and secular reasons that you said, and that is that I was concerned that, much like the pitfalls of the abolition movement, the slavery that the abolition movement fought against, and the transatlantic slave trade, which you compared it to, I was very worried that I could not delineate between the commencement of a life and, when it's okay to cut it off. So I think especially that, and the fact that feminism rests on the precepts that there's a thick conceptual definition of womanhood which entitles women to the protection by the men who have to work to earn their company. I think that is very solid grounds to make the case against the excesses of the sexual revolution, against things like abortion and something you mentioned as well, which is the pill, which I want to hit on at some point, to women without necessarily throwing the Bible at them.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.